The Jedi spent their lives freeing others. But what if they were never free themselves? What if the heroes of the Republic, the guardians of peace, were bound by the very thing they worshipped? The code, the Force, the illusion of freedom that kept them obedient to rules they didn't make, and masters they couldn't see. They took children from their homes, erased their families, and called it destiny. They denied love, passion, and individuality in the name of balance. They fought wars for politicians, obeyed orders from the Senate, and pretended it was service to the Force. But at what point does devotion become enslavement? The Jedi didn't live freely. They existed within boundaries drawn long before they were born, and they accepted those boundaries as holy. Their entire identity depended on obedience. To the Council, to the Code, to the unseen will of the Force. And yet they called themselves free. Maybe that's the greatest illusion the Jedi ever believed, that peace comes from control, that freedom comes from restraint, that servitude can somehow be sacred if you call it duty. They weren't chained by cruelty. They were chained by faith. Because when you're taught from birth that questioning the system means falling to darkness, how could you ever see the light? In this video, we'll break down how the Jedi became prisoners of their own beliefs, why their code turned devotion into dependence, and how the galaxy's supposed liberators might have been the most enslaved of all. The Jedi claimed to be free, servants of the Force, detached from worldly desire. But when you really think about it, how free were they really? Every Jedi was taken as a child, stripped of identity, renamed, and placed into a system that dictated what they could feel, who they could love, and even what they could believe. That's not freedom, that's conditioning. The Jedi didn't choose their lives, they were assigned them, like soldiers in a machine that called itself enlightened. The Jedi Temple looked like a monastery on the surface, but underneath it functioned more like a training camp. Children were told that attachment led to suffering, yet they were attached to the order itself from birth. They traded one kind of dependency for another. When Anakin told Padme that the Jedi are encouraged to love in a way, it was a desperate rationalization. The order didn't allow love, it allowed loyalty to the institution and nothing else. And that loyalty was absolute. The Jedi didn't retire, didn't resign, and didn't question their mission. If you walked away, you were branded a heretic. Count Dooku left the Order, and the Council treated him like a traitor, not a man who made a personal choice. That's not what freedom looks like. It's what obedience looks like when it's dressed in sacred robes. Even the Force itself became a leash. Jedi believed that to go against the will of the Force was to fall to darkness. But what does that really mean? It means every instinct, every emotion, every spark of individuality had to be filtered through an invisible authority they couldn't question. The Sith may have been corrupted by passion, but at least they were allowed to have it. Look at the way the Jedi handled Anakin's mother. They wouldn't free her because attachments are forbidden. Think about that. An order that preaches compassion refused to save a slave because it might create emotional dependency. That's not virtue. It's indoctrination so deep they confused empathy for weakness. And that's what makes the Jedi tragedy so haunting. They were enslaved not by chains but by ideology. They thought freedom meant detachment, when in reality it meant the exact opposite: connection, understanding, and choice. The Jedi feared those things, so they built walls around their hearts and called it discipline. Even Yoda, the wisest of them all, repeated the same dogma for centuries. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Beautiful words, but also terrifying when you realise what they meant for every child raised under them. Imagine growing up told that love is dangerous and individuality is failure. How could they ever be free when their thoughts themselves were policed by a code? The Jedi weren't evil, they were victims of their own good intentions. They believed they were protecting the galaxy, but what they were really protecting was a system that defined freedom as obedience. That's the cruelest kind of slavery, the kind where you don't even know you're a prisoner. And the galaxy didn't see it either, because the Jedi carried lightsabers, not shackles. They looked like heroes, not captives. But under the surface, their entire identity was built on submission to the Council, to the Code, and to the will of a Force that demanded silence more often than understanding. To understand how deep the Jedi's servitude ran, You have to look at how they served the Republic. The Jedi weren't rulers, they were employees of a government they didn't control. They said they didn't serve politics, yet they obeyed every Senate order that came through. They were the Republic's moral soldiers, cleaning up corruption they weren't allowed to expose, fighting wars they didn't start, and dying for leaders they didn't elect. That's not peacekeeping, that's servitude with better branding. The irony is that the Jedi thought they were guiding the Republic, but the Republic was guiding them. It used their image to justify everything from military intervention to political suppression. Every time a Jedi ignited their lightsaber in defense of peace, a senator somewhere used it to pass another bill expanding Republic control. The Jedi were supposed to serve the Force, but in the end, they served bureaucracy. Take the Clone Wars. The Jedi didn't choose to fight, they were ordered to. The very moment Yoda accepted command of the clone army, the Jedi stopped being guardians of peace and became generals in a state-sponsored war. They justified it as necessity, but necessity is how every empire recruits idealists. The clones were slaves bred for obedience, and the Jedi fought alongside them without protest. How free can you be if your army doesn't even have free will? It's almost poetic that the Jedi fought to free others, while unknowingly fighting for their own chains. They believed themselves detached from greed, but they were owned by a system that paid them in validation instead of money. As long as the Council told them they were righteous, they never questioned the cause. Even when the Republic began to rot, the Jedi stayed loyal. They felt the corruption, they saw the manipulation, but they refused to walk away. Because the Jedi didn't know how to disobey, they didn't know how to live outside of command. That's not freedom. That's dependence. And it's the kind of dependence that destroyed them when the Republic collapsed. When Palpatine executed Order 66, the Jedi didn't just die, they fulfilled the final command of their servitude. The clones pulled the trigger, but the code built the cage. The Jedi had spent generations following orders blindly, so when the galaxy turned against them, none of them knew how to survive as individuals. They had forgotten how to exist without structure. Obi-Wan's exile on Tatooine shows this perfectly. Even when free, he still acts like a servant. He hides, he watches, he waits for a new order to follow. He doesn't rebuild, he doesn't reform, he just keeps serving, even in silence. Because the Jedi weren't trained to live without orders. They were trained to obey until the end. The Republic might have fallen, but the Jedi's chains didn't break. They just became invisible. Luke Skywalker had to destroy the old ways because he saw what the old order never could. That balance doesn't come from control. It comes from choice. The Jedi were never meant to be slaves, but that's what they became, bound not by oppression, but by faith in a system that never truly served them. And maybe that's why their story hurts so much, because they fought slavery everywhere they saw it, except within themselves. It's easy to think of slavery as something physical, chains, prisons, forced labour. But the Jedi show us a different kind of captivity, a mental one, a spiritual one, and it's what makes their fall so inevitable. Because when you spend your entire life suppressing desire, ignoring fear, and denying love, you're not freeing your mind, you're locking it away. Anakin Skywalker saw through this illusion. He grew up as an actual slave, chained and owned, and when he joined the Jedi, he traded one master for another. He even said it himself in Attack of the Clones, "I'm a Jedi, I know I'm better than this." That wasn't arrogance, it was desperation. He thought becoming a Jedi meant freedom, but it just meant a different kind of servitude. And when he finally broke free, he swung so far in the opposite direction that he became the thing he hated most, a master of slaves himself. Anakin's story is proof that the Jedi system was unsustainable. You can't teach someone to be emotionless and expect them to remain human. The moment the Jedi denied their humanity, they set the stage for their downfall. Because every rule, every vow, every prohibition was a link in the same invisible chain. Look at how the galaxy treated them after their fall. The Empire didn't enslave the Jedi. It replaced them with inquisitors, ex-Jedi who finally embraced the freedom they were denied. The Sith corrupted that freedom, but it was still freedom all the same. That's the darkest truth in Star Wars. The only time the Jedi truly acted with autonomy was when they were no longer Jedi at all. And even after all that, the legacy of servitude continued. Luke rebuilt the Order, but he repeated many of the same mistakes. The new Jedi still rejected attachment, still glorified discipline over emotion, and still served an abstract balance instead of individual purpose. The names changed, but the chains remained. It's tragic because the Jedi wanted to serve the Force out of faith, not fear. But faith without freedom is just obedience in disguise. They became servants to an ideal they could never question, worshipping balance like a god that demanded sacrifice instead of understanding. That's not devotion, it's dependency. The Jedi could have been so much more. They could have evolved beyond their own traditions, embraced the full spectrum of what it means to feel, to live, to choose. But they were too afraid of losing control. And control is the opposite of freedom. The real irony is that the Sith, for all their darkness, were right about one thing. The Jedi were slaves, not to others, but to themselves. They mistook control for peace, silence for wisdom, and obedience for enlightenment. And maybe that's what Star Wars has been trying to tell us all along. The fight between Jedi and Sith isn't just about good and evil, it's about freedom and control. And in their pursuit of peace, the Jedi forgot which side they were really on. Because in the end, the truest kind of slavery isn't to another person. It's to a belief you're too afraid to question.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.